What is the discipline of history? How would we define that?
So,
How
like we've
how
already
should
said,
I? Yeah.
it's more than just names and places and dates, because that's the complaint that everybody has about the history courses that they took in high school
Hmm.
and before they actually go to college. I think it's sort of a failure of the modern education system that the history courses don't get interesting until you get to college.
Hmm.
And even then, sometimes they don't really get interesting until like your junior year of college. Like the actual study of history itself, for what it is not something that you need a ton of degrees for. Like you can actually be a historian without any degrees. I want to actually preface this conversation with that. It does help to have a degree. It does help to have the university education in history, as long as you have gone to a good university and you have been taught how to properly study history, because history is the most unique of subjects, because it is both an art and a science. Like classically, we think of subjects being either an art or a science. Mathematics is a science. Music is an art. Physics is a science. Poetry is an art. Like we think of things as being either art or science. History actually is both. And it is, in my experience, the only subject that can be both art and science by its own nature. And what do I mean by that? So it is a science because there are methodologies and processes that one must follow in order to do it correctly, in order to have a good study of history and a good production of historical ideas. So I like to use the example of when you're writing an essay. You approach a historical essay the same way that you approach a science essay. Not 100% the same way, because when you're approaching a science essay, you have experiments and data and all those other things that you have to compile. But what I mean is that you start with a theory. But before you have a theory, you have to be asking a question. So, history as a science is looking back at certain things and going, okay, what caused World War One? Which, and anybody that knows anything about the First World War will probably answer, well, how much time do we have? But you can then, from that question, form probably a more specific question. I would say, what was the most specific question that I can think of at the moment is, what was the most specific economic factor in the cause of World War One? Let's go with that,
Okay.
because every war has at least an economic factor.
Hmm. Yeah. So, what was the linchpin of that
By the
facet of
way, I
it?
don't know the answer to that question. I just asked it.
Hmm. So, how would you get the answer?
So you research a little bit about maybe a topic, because there's a difference between topic and theory. The topic is the broad sort of whatever your writing is about, and then the theory is the supposed answer to the question that you have in the first place. So you research that topic a little bit, and then you come up with a question. Then you research a little bit more, and you come up kind of with an answer. You research a little bit more, and that answer becomes a theory. And then you research to the point that you try to prove that theory. And we'll get into the ways that people do this incorrectly as well. But one of the ways that people do history incorrectly is by viewing it as either an art or a science, but it is both. Not acknowledging that it is both is actually a huge mistake on the part of the historian,
Hmm.
which is why, in my humble opinion, historians are also the biggest nerds on the planet.
Hmm.
Because we have all the qualities of the art nerds, which are going to be like, so we have all the qualities of comic book nerds and all of the qualities of math nerds and science nerds.
So, I want that combination though.
I don't care. You've got it. That's what I am. I have all of the qualities of every kind of nerd that you could think of. Which at some point we'll even talk about what a nerd even is, because no matter if you're passionate about something and know a lot about it, you are a nerd for that thing. It could be football. You can be a football nerd. That is possible. But anyway, like I would define you as a sports nerd.
Less so than I used to be in the past.
Less so than you were in the past, but when like around the time when we first met and when we were in college together, you were a sports nerd.
Yeah.
But I would say that historians are the biggest nerds because we have basically every aspect of every other kind of nerd. To be a good historian, you have to have those aspects. I will go that far as to say that you have to have basically every quality of every kind of nerd in order to be a good historian. You have to have the creative aspect of like a D&D nerd. So like the best DM you can think of. You have to have that kind of creative aspect, but you also have to have the analytical aspect of the biggest science nerd that you can think of. Also, why I think personally history is the ultimate subject, and we'll get to that in a moment.
Oh, it makes sense. Like you're sifting through all of the data of everything that's happened, which is, well, about as vast as something can get. So, yeah, you better be a nerd about that. You better be willing to dive into it. But you also better be creative and a good storyteller because you can't just, like we said, it's not just a collection of facts. And you can't write a book that's a pure collection of facts because no one will read it. So you have to tell it through the lens of a story.
This is why I was given the advice. When did I take that class? I think it was my senior year of high school. Or of college, rather. My senior year of college. I was given the advice to not pursue higher education in history any farther. Don't go for a master's and don't go for a doctorate. Because any further education course in history, any system of education in history, will take every creative cell in your body and murder it right in front of your eyes. And that is basically a direct quote from one of my favorite history professors that I've ever had. And he even sort of lamented, he had been a doctor of history for 13 years, I think, at this point, that he'd had his doctorate. And he said, I am just now. I've been a doctor of history for over 10 years. I am just now getting back the creative thinking that I had when I first started. So, and this is where history becomes an art. One of the ways, at least, that history becomes an art, because when you are writing in history, when you are instructing people about history, like you said, it has to be a story. A good historian is a good storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
Today is October the 7th. I should be able to sit down and tell you and fully understand what led to the Battle of Lepanto, but also tell an amazing and fantastic and attention-grabbing story of the Battle of Lepanto.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have to because Chesterton already wrote the poem. You can go and look it up for yourself. One of the best poems ever written, in my opinion.
There you go. Even though it's historical fiction, Louis de Wohl wrote The Last Crusader, which I'll always mention with fondness in my heart. So,
yes, I have not read that. I understand it is an excellent novel.
there's the reason it is one of the books behind me.
Well,
in this row.
Really,
so
anything Louis de Wohl has written is excellent. The Golden Thread, I think he also wrote about St. Ignatius, is fantastic. He wrote a novel about St. Joan of Arc that I did read that is fantastic. Anything Louis de Wohl has written, go out and read. And yes, The Last Crusader, that too.
So
Dominic's about
have
to
a
show
visual. My lights are fun, but yeah, go pick up a copy of that.
Don Juan of Austria is going off to war. So that's the way that history is an art. You have to be a good storyteller. So when you're writing in history, in order to make it interesting, history for the masses, like Dawson would say,
Hmm.
You almost have to write it like you're writing a novel in a way that grabs people's attention. And you don't have to appeal to everybody because not everybody's going to be interested in the topic that you're talking about. I love The Flying Tigers. One of my favorite pre World War II stories is the story of the Flying Tigers, which was a group of fighter pilots that the United States sent to China to
Hmm.
both protect them from the Japanese and train Chinese fighter pilots. And they were dissolved only a few months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. That's one of my favorite stories. I'm okay if you're not interested in the Flying Tigers. I
Hmm.
love the Flying Tigers. I think they're awesome. I think the P-40 Warhawk is an amazing plane. You don't have to think of that. I think it primarily because I love the Flying Tigers. I think it's a neat story.
Yeah. Well, and since life is a story, why not? Why can't history be it? History
Exactly.
should be it, like we're saying.
Basically, everything is a story and it should be told in an interesting way.
Hmm.
There are some things that are just objectively not interesting. Like telling the life story of a guy who has never actually done anything interesting and has pretty much just sat on his couch and watched television for his entire life. Yeah, that's boring. And we should not be aiming for that at all.
Hmm.
But if we're telling the story of Don John of Austria, that is interesting. And that is awesome. And that we can tell in a beautiful and artistic way. Because remember, art is truth, goodness, and beauty.
Yes, it is.
And it is the duty of the historian to reflect on the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of the past, and to present it in a good way. And it is also to use more of a modern idea about art. Uh, it's somewhat up to interpretation. You could say that this specific economic factor was the driving factor of the First World War. Or you could say that this specific social factor was the driving factor of the First World War. Or you could say that this specific religious factor was the driving factor of the First World War. And to an extent, all those answers are right.
Hmm.
For one, because the First World War is just that complicated of an issue.
Hmm.
Um, but for another, because it is the historian's prerogative to go, no, I think it's this. But you also have to be able to prove it, which is where the science comes in.